Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the OFN Meeting Room as we talk Baltimore Ravens football. That's right, the Baltimore Ravens and their draft, which looks to be successful by my eyes, and our lads' draft guide. Well, there were some pluses and minuses that we'll go over, but we wanted some expertise. That's the reason why we decided to introduce and invite Tony Lombardi, first time on this network. He's the managing partner for the RussellStreetReport.com. Tony, thanks for taking your time to talk to us today about the Baltimore Ravens.
My pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Well, the draft guide for anybody out there watching is right here. You can order your draft guide and find out all about Baltimore Raven draft picks. Got a whole bunch of profiles in here. And a matter of fact, looks like the Ravens had with their 9 picks, Tony?
10 picks.
10 picks.
10 picks.
And I'm trying to see here if they were all in the guide. I believe they were. I think all 10 were in the guide. And there was also 3 free agent signings that were in the guide. So double-digit player profiles right here in the RLads draft guide. So log on to rlads.com. And if you are watching on our YouTube channel at Prime Sports Network, please make sure to subscribe. Okay, let's go right to it and start with Patrick Queen, because Patrick Queen was definitely one of the players that I thought was a definite possibility with the Ravens with their first pick of 28. And was that a similar feeling for the fans and you as well, knowing that linebacker was near or top the list?
I think going into the draft, Greg, that there were 3 primary needs that I believe fans thought the Ravens should try to fill through the draft. And that was inside linebacker, edge rusher, and offensive line. And it's almost like a rite of passage that they're looking for wide receivers as well. But I think of those, the most glaring was probably inside linebacker, because the last thing that the Ravens fans remember is that loss to Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
When Derrick Henry ran all over
That's
them.
Right.
And that's something that Ravens fans aren't accustomed to, nor is the organization. So they wanted to do everything they could to try to stem that and try to turn that around, because that was a little bit embarrassing to the Ravens last year. So they went with an inside linebacker. I think that was the best player on their board, Patrick Queen, and it met a need. So that was really a no-brainer pick for them.
Yeah, he's got outstanding tools, blazing speed for the position, only a 1-year starter. So the best is probably yet to come for this player. Sideline to sideline pursuit, the toughness you're looking for. And you mentioned that game and the position as well. But I think when we take a look at the other draft picks, you have another potential full-time Mike linebacker in Malik Harrison from Ohio State, who was taken as the 3rd choice in round 3. And if we just want to stay in the interior of the defensive line, you have Justin Matabuk out of Texas A&M with the first pick of round 3, and Broderick Washington in round 5 at defensive tackle. So 4 of the picks were interior players in that defense, 2 at linebacker and 2 at defensive tackle.
Yeah, and that really speaks, Greg, to the position I said the Ravens have, is that they were embarrassed by that. If you think back to when you think of Baltimore Ravens prior to last year, you thought defense. And they took a lot of pride into keeping opposing top running backs under 100 yards game in and game out. And that game, they knew that the only way the Titans were going to beat them is if they got a steady diet of Derrick Henry and didn't stop him, yet they couldn't stop him. And I think some of those tackling efforts were a little bit embarrassing. They did everything they could this offseason, even with the acquisitions of Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe, both guys that are really stout as edge support guys. We saw guys like Nick Chubb take advantage of the Ravens also during the 2019 season. So it's something that they wanted to address, and I think they did a good job doing it.
Because C.J. Mosley got hurt last year for the Jets, my team, it was one of those situations where a top player leaves one organization and both organizations suffered because the Jets didn't get the impact yet from C.J. Mosley. They got him in one game because he was an absolute monster in that Buffalo game. And if he didn't get hurt, I mean, the Jets probably win that game because they were just killing Buffalo until he went down with the injury. But then leaving Baltimore's defense just showed you exactly how much they missed him. and Patrick Queen is a big part of hoping that they find somebody that can help him back to make sure they get that interior toughness again. But what about Matabuke, the defensive tackle from Texas A&M? Again, we might as well stick with that theme. He was their first pick in the third round. This is a talented player. He's a player that the Ravens picked this kid. They expect a lot from him.
They do. And one of the things that, I mentioned edge rusher as being one of the needs going into the draft. The Ravens really didn't come away with a drafted edge rusher, but I think they're looking at different ways of creating pressure. And they, like I said, they got Calais Campbell, they got Derek Wolfe from
Yep.
Denver, and both of those guys create that internal pressure, which makes it easier for the guys on the edge to get home. There was a lot of times last year where opposing quarterbacks would climb the pocket, and in doing so, they could stay away from whether it was Tyus Bowser or Jalen Ferguson or Matt Judon or even Pernell McPhee before he got injured. They were getting away from those guys by climbing the pocket. With Campbell and Wolfe and now Matabuke, those guys, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. And what they liked about this kid is that he shows some moves internally inside the tackles, facing the guards, that he can slip into the backfield. And maybe he doesn't get the sack, but he keeps that quarterback from stepping up in the pocket and allowing the edge rushers to get home. So they really like this kid. He's got really good athleticism. In fact, they were showing on Twitter, you may have even seen it, some video of Sam Darnold and Matabuke along with Baker Mayfield.
Okay.
They were running the 40-yard dash at the same time. He runs the 40 faster than both of those guys.
Okay. That's very important.
Not bad for a guy that weighs 300
Not
pounds.
bad at all. He posted 10.5 tackles for loss for 2 straight seasons. Just taking a little bit from the profile at our lads. Let's see. He's an ideal fit for a team that wants a throwback 3 technique that can shoot the gaps and cause havoc. Upside of being a top shelf interior pass rusher that can make a difference on running downs. And so Matabuke, again, the first third round pick for Baltimore. And by the way, getting back to the edge rushers, and we talk about Mosley and then the loss of Zadarius Smith. How do the Ravens fans take to that? Because some fans might just go, okay, well, salary cap, and there's nothing you can do about it. Were the fans upset that the Ravens couldn't find ways to keep those 2 players?
I don't think that fans were upset about the loss of CJ. Not because they didn't like him, but for the number he signed for with the Jets. The Jets were really flush with cap space. Yeah. The Ravens were not. So it was really hard to justify that kind of money for the Ravens to sign a guy like CJ. With Zadarius Smith, I think there's probably some more trepidation from the fan base for him. But we've seen that before when these guys graduate. When I mean graduate, they get to that unrestricted free agent level, that they move on to places other than Baltimore because they command such high dollars. And with a lot of cap dollars being available in the marketplace, those guys are going to chase that. I think with this year, they look at Zadarius Smith and say they didn't want to lose Matt Judon, have that same thing happen all over again. So They franchised him. They're working on a long-term deal. I don't know if it gets done, but I know they're trying to get there.
Okay. And how about Harrison, the kid from Ohio State, the third of the 3 third-round picks? What is the expectations for that player?
Well, I think what the Ravens do differently than most teams, perhaps even all teams, is they look at guys on the defensive side of the football who are going to fill roles, not necessarily the prototypical positions of the Mike and the Sam, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The Ravens just want athletes, and they have a lot of different sub packages. The times the Ravens can get caught up is when the other team's running no huddle and they can't get the sub packages on the field, so that kind of hurts them at times. But that said, the Ravens look at Queen and Malik Harrison as being complementary pieces. One of them's a thumper, the other one's really fast. Okay. That's not to say Malik Harrison isn't fast, because he does have good athleticism. But I think that paired together, they're looking for guys that can complement each other's skill sets. So when you think of the Ravens, a lot of times their base package, Greg, is a 4-2-5. So they have 5 defensive backs, 2 linebackers. So having linebackers that can run like these guys can, I think really helps do what Wink Martindale wants to do. And I was told that Patrick Queen was the one guy that he wanted more than any other defensive player because of what he wants to do on the defensive side of the football.
All right, let's go with the second pick, the second round pick, 55, J.K. Dobbins. And this was our lad's top rated running back. Matter of fact, Baltimore has our lad's two top rated players for positions, Dobbins at running back and Ben Bredesen, the guard at Michigan. We'll get to it in a little bit. But Dobbins, the second all time leading rusher for Ohio State, has top tier ability as a rusher, as a receiver, and as a blocker. I mean, this kid has been extremely productive for the last 3 seasons. He has had a lot of touches. There's no question about that. But some were surprised that he was available when he was available in the pecking order for running backs.
Yeah, it was a surprise for the Ravens because I mentioned those 4 different positions that they were trying to fill through the draft, or at least create some depth in the draft. Running back was not one of them. You know, they have guys. Gus Edwards did a great job backing up Mark Ingram, and Justice Hill, that was drafted in the 4th round in 2019. They hold high promise or hopes for him. So when you look at a running back being taken at that position, it was surprising if you don't look at the player that they picked. But that guy, Dobbins, when you look at his stats from his last year at Ohio State, very, very similar to a guy who was taken 4th overall back in 2016 in Ezekiel Elliott. So you compare those two numbers, those two players, and at 55, which coincidentally was this exact same position that the Ravens drafted Ray Rice back
All
in
right.
2008 with the 55th overall pick.
Okay.
And by the way, Dobbins is going to wear the same number that Ray Rice wore, number 27.
Oh, hopefully he has a better
Yeah,
career, a longer career.
a longer
Yeah,
career for
than
sure.
Ray Rice. But knowing the danger of Jackson in the backfield just makes those running backs that much more dangerous as well. And when you take look, I'm a Gus Edwards guy because I'm a Rutgers guy. So when I talked about Edwards coming in, he was one of those non-drafted guys that I said keep an eye on this one because I know what I saw at Rutgers this final year. They weren't a good football team, but I could see that he had that ability at the next level to make a team and see what happens. And then all of a sudden he gets the opportunity to play a lot more with Baltimore. And I think a lot of that, though, does have to do with how things open up because of Lamar Jackson. So just imagine what potential there is for a guy like J.K. Dobbins. And that's the way I would look at it, is that maybe Dobbins isn't Ezekiel Elliott, but with Lamar Jackson in the backfield, maybe he'll produce the way Ezekiel Elliott does. So,
Yeah, and that's really possible because when you think about the offense that Ohio State ran last year, very similar to what the Ravens did in 2019. And getting back to Gus Edwards, you bring up a really good point that he's a good fit for the Ravens primarily because Lamar commands so much attention and it makes it easier for the running backs. If you think back to when Joe Flacco was hurt during the 2018 season and Lamar came in, they made some changes to that offense, obviously to fit his skill set, but you can't really overnight flip a playbook. But what they did do, which I thought was interesting, Alex Collins had been the featured back when Joe Flacco was there, and they did a lot of zone stretch plays and him running off the backside of that. But Collins wasn't really a north and south guy, and they immediately switched to Gus Edwards because they knew that he was, and it was a perfect fit. And then when they signed Mark Ingram last offseason, he did very well for the Ravens, was a Pro Bowl player. I think he had for like 1,200 yards in 2019. And then now you're going to have Dobbins. So I don't know if all those guys stick on the team. Maybe one of them is trade bait. But my guess would be that your guy, Gus Edwards, is the guy that they might let go of.
Okay. Let's talk about the second pick in round 3. And I might as well also talk about both receivers, Devin Duvernay and also James Prochet, because I like both of these receivers. And I think Baltimore got one of the steals in the draft where they selected Prochet. Take a look at it. Interesting that Duvernay led the nation last year with 103 regular season receptions. Take a look at Prochet. He led the nation the last 2 years combined in receptions. So these guys get a lot of balls thrown their way. So they have excellent ball skills. Duvernay's got 4.3 sprinter speed. He's got a nice combination of speed and toughness as well. And also, Duvernay gives you kick return experience. Prochet gives you punt return experience. And you're taking a look at a Prochet, that a kid that just was I mean, you take a look at him as the all-time leader in catches, yards, and touchdowns at SMU. He also came up with the big plays at the big moments. So I don't know why Prochet lasted to the 6th round. He was a 3rd round R-Lads grade, and that's exactly where I thought he was going to go. And you said it just before, Ravens looking for those receivers. They have found their receivers. Barring injuries, they have found their receivers. They got a couple of good ones.
They did, and Duvernay first because he was taken first. The one thing they like about Duvernay, well, actually, they like a lot of things about him, but he checks the boxes. There's a thing that floats around Baltimore, play like a Rave, and what that means is they want smart players, they want tough players, they want fast players, they want guys that love the game and guys that have high character. And he checks all those boxes off. What they really like about him, in addition to those things, is you mentioned it, Greg, what he does after he catches the football. He runs really well. He not only runs with speed, he runs angry. I think I read somewhere, it may have been even in your publication, that he runs like he hates humanity. I thought that was a pretty accurate description based upon the film that I watched of him. But it was, I think they liken him also to a guy that came to Baltimore late in his career that really embraced Baltimore, and Baltimore embraced him, Steve Smith Sr.
Okay.
So, kind of, good hands, angry after the catch, yards after the catch, plus he has some top end speed, as you mentioned. So that's a real good pick. And I'm kind of surprised that they got that kind of value in the 3rd round for a need like that. Again, they wanted to get back to complementary players. They have Miles Boykin. I know that there was some, upset Ravens fans because they didn't take the kid out of Baylor, Mims, because he was on the board.
And Jet fans
But
are happy about that, by the way.
Right. Okay. But they didn't take Mims because they thought that he was a lot like Miles Boykin, who they took last year out of Notre Dame.
Okay.
So why have guys that had similar skill sets? They wanted guys that had complementary skill sets. Boykin's a lot different than Marquise Brown, and Duvernay is a lot different than both of those guys. So you've got the 3 together, and they could help each other out because their skills are complementary. Now, with Prochet, they needed a guy who could return punts. And one thing that the Ravens really focused in on this draft when it comes to receivers are guys with good hands. You mentioned how solid his hands are. Same with Duvernay. They got a little tired of guys dropping passes. It goes back to Brashad Perryman, who dropped a lot of passes when they drafted him. And then they had last year in that divisional playoff game, you saw Seth Roberts drop some passes. You saw Hayden Hurst drop some passes. And the Ravens are just tired of that kind of thing. So they wanted sure-handed guys. And they said, of all the skills a receiver needs to have first and foremost, it's the ability to make contested catches. And both of those guys have proven that they can do that at the collegiate level.
All right, great points. Let's also, by the way, let's stick with receiver because one of the top graded players that were still available as far as a free agent was tight end Jacob Breeland from Oregon. And there's no way Jacob Breeland goes undrafted if he didn't suffer the ACL injury in October. But still, there was the thought that he would be a 4th round guy, maybe 5th round guy at the least. The fact that the Ravens were able to get him without using up a draft pick is pretty impressive, maybe pretty fortunate. But this is a kid with good hands, toughness. He's got blocking ability. He's not the complete package because he's not a vertical threat, but he does all the other things really well for the position.
Yeah, he's a nice player for the Ravens. And the Ravens have done a good job developing tight ends over the years. You've got guys like Nick Boyle, who's now, I think, in his 5th or 6th season with the team out of the University of Delaware. Mark Andrews, a 3rd round pick back in 2018. He's played really well for the Ravens. They lost Hayden Hurst in a trade because Hayden wanted a little bit more playing time because Andrews was taking it all away from him. But this kid, Breeland, they've got room for a tight end like that. And he seems to be a guy that would be, as you mentioned, he participates in the run game, and that's something important to the Ravens because they are a run-first offense.
Okay, now we're going to get to some offensive linemen here, and there's 4 guys that the Ravens added, 2 draft picks and a couple of signings. But out of the guys that they added, it's interesting because Tyree Phillips, the massive kid from Mississippi State, actually went as a 7th round grade from our lads as the 4th of 4 3rd round selections. Only a 1-year starter at Mississippi State, a community college transfer. Arles believes this guy's a project, and maybe he is. But Baltimore, there's something they must like about him to take him in the third round. Mentioned Bredesen, Arled's top-rated offensive guard, who had a second-round grade going in the fourth round, a 4-year starter, a two-time team captain, and then the two guys that were signed after the draft, Cologne Castillo from Missouri and Deshaun Dixon from San Diego State, both 3-year starters. The one I'd keep an eye on is Cologne Castillo. He's a player that his best might be ahead of him.
Yeah, one of the things that the Ravens do a really good job of, and I'm sure other teams try to do this, but I think because of the continuity of the organization, guys that have been around for a long time, the scouts and the coaches understand each other. So what might be a good player for the Ravens might not be a good player for another team because of the way they're coached up and their offensive style and what
Absolutely.
they want to do at the line of scrimmage. So that's where you get into these grades. Now, I do believe that Tyree Phillips was a guy that they wanted to have him. They thought they might get him a little bit later, but they really liked him, and they thought with the 3 picks that they had, let's go and get him and not risk losing
Okay.
him because maybe another team might grade him the same. But I must admit that when they made that pick, I was a little surprised, and my surprise is really based upon things that I read. Not that I
Sure.
know the
Sure.
player, but things that I
Yeah.
read. But the way these scouts work for the Ravens, they're out there on the road 180 nights a year away from their families. They get to know the players. They get to know the
Yeah.
players' teammates. They get to know the players' coaches, their family, and all those things add up to a grade that they have for a player that they think can be a Baltimore Raven. So, I thought maybe it was a little early for him, but who am I to tell
Right.
Eric DeCosta how to do his
You're
job?
right. They've done it very well for many years. So
Right.
you're absolutely right. Okay, but again, 4 offensive linemen, 2 draft picks. So overall, how is the offensive line with those additions? How do they fit in, especially Bredesen? Because Bredesen might be the most ready to play.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. I think they clearly sent a message to the guys that are there right now that you better come in shape, you ready to play, and ratchet up your game a little bit. Ben Powers was a guy they took, I believe, in the third or fourth round in 2019 out of Oklahoma, and he didn't play a whole lot in 2019. So that serves notice to him.
Okay.
With Marshall Yonda leaving, that's a big leader. That's a potential Hall of Fame guy that just left the roster. So they knew they had to fix that hole. And I think with the fact that they added these guys in the draft, Bredesen is a guy they have a lot of intel on since John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh happen to be brothers. They know the University of Michigan staff really well. And Joe Delisandris is a really underrated offensive line coach. He's done a terrific job with some guys. When they lost their center last year, Matt Skura, and they brought a guy in like Pat McCarry, who was undrafted guy and played really well for that team. I mean, they led the league in points and in rushing. So he's obviously done a great job with some of these kids. So I think that they've gotten, it's hard to say that they've gotten better, but they've at least tried to stay the same with some of these guys. And having lost, Marshall Yonda, they did add DJ Fluker from the Seattle Seahawks as a free agent signing there. And it's my understanding that Fluker actually reached out to the Ravens because he said they play the game the way I want to play it. So that's an encouraging sign as
All
well.
right. And the final pick was Geno Stone. And this was another one of the situations where the Ravens looked like they were able to land a bargain because Stone received a 4th-round grade at Arledge, yet went with the 7th-round pick. And even though he's only a 1-year starter, probably the limited experience and his size limitations might be the reason. I can just guess why he lasted until the 7th round. But uh, he's a secure fundamental tackler, has uncanny ability to process route combinations, and has off the chart instincts and special teams potential that could land him a job, according to our lad. So, not bad for a 7th-round pick.
When I read the scouting report on him and I looked at some of his film, he reminded me of a guy that's done really well, taken in a similar position. I think it was a 7th round, perhaps 6th round, with Chuck Clark that plays for the Ravens.
Okay.
They just extended him, and he's a guy who's a little undersized, not the fastest guy in the world, a guy who's really smart, and as you said, for Stone, can diagnose those plays in advance, and that helps him play faster. So when you look at a guy like Geno Stone, he sounds a lot like Chuck Clark, and I think that that's a guy who's going to really be a special teams contributor. He just seems to be a real baller, a guy that loves the game, and the Ravens have a lot of great intel about him because they're really tight with the staff at the University of Iowa.
Okay, now one last player we want to mention, and that is a player whose dad is a WWE wrestler. Yeah. So that's going to go over well with the fan base. And of course, he's a fullback. And of course, his name is there's a Rex in his name.
There's Bronson Rechsteiner. Does that sound like a fullback or what?
Sounds like a football player.
If he wasn't a fullback, he'd have to be the old school middle linebacker, right?
Absolutely. So
yeah, but he played for a small school, Kennesaw State, out of Georgia, but if you have a chance to look at some of his video, this kid is really fast. I'm looking at it here. He ran a 4.48 40. He weighs 230 pounds of solid muscle at 6 feet tall, and runs a 4.48. He was running away from defensive backs when he broke through the line of scrimmage. It's crazy. I know it's a smaller school,
still,
but
that's fast for a fullback,
right? So you look at a guy like that, and maybe he's a special teams contributor. Sure. Maybe makes the team that way. Maybe they put him on a practice squad. I know they've amped up the practice squad this year, I think, to 12 players. So maybe he lands there. So we'll see. But it's an interesting pick, and one that I think a lot of fans will be watching as he develops through preseason and into through training camp and into preseason.
And Tony, before I let you go, speaking of the fans, what was the general reaction to the draft?
Well, the reaction was really positive, and a lot of that is based upon when you watch NFL Network and listen to Mel Kiper on ESPN and whatnot, how they've said so many great things about the Ravens draft. But that said, I think the smart fans also know that those grades mean nothing unless these guys do it on the field come September and in the future years. So, because we have seen in the past where the Ravens had some good grades on drafts, and some of those guys didn't pan out as well as they thought they might. So what? And even the Ravens, as ecstatic as they are about the draft, they know that the work's hardly complete. They've got to get these guys in and get them working and get them a playbook and things like that to make sure that they can take that athleticism and put it on an NFL field.
By the way, Tony, since I am a Jet fan and do the Jet shows, and I need to convey as much information as I can regarding Breshad Perriman, are you surprised at all that he actually has seemed to turn things around for the better since he's left Baltimore? Is that surprising? Did you think when he left Baltimore he was done, you would never hear from him again?
I wasn't sure. I know that he needed a change of scenery because the circumstances in Baltimore are a little bit different. The Ravens have really struggled to find receivers in the draft for a long time. And their best receivers are guys historically that they've acquired that were maybe in the October of their careers. Guys like Derek Mason and Steve Smith and Anquan Boldin, those kinds of guys. And they happen to be the best receivers the Ravens have ever had, and they were not homegrown. So having that, and he was a first-round pick, ended up being a bust. It's a wide receiver. So all these things put a lot of pressure on Breshad Perriman. He ended up being injury-prone early on. So, but I know that they like that guy. He's a good kid. He's got blazing speed. And I think most people hope that he does well, as long as it's not against the Ravens.
Sure. Well, I don't think the Jets play the Ravens this year. I don't think they do.
No, they don't. But I remember there was a game that the Ravens needed to win against the Browns when he was playing for the Browns at the end of the 2018 season to make it to the playoffs. And the Browns almost came back and beat the Ravens. And Breshad Perriman had a couple of big catches in that game.
I remember the game. Yes. I don't remember those catches, but that's it. Okay, yes. Interesting.
One catch, he tight-roped the sideline, got his feet inbounds, made a terrific catch falling out of bounds. We're like, who is that
Yeah, right.
guy?
Exactly. I know.
So sometimes a change of scenery helps you mentally, and I think that's happened with Breshad Perriman. I'm actually surprised he didn't stay around in Tampa, but at the same time, you saw what they did. They really transformed that roster.
Yeah, and they've got their two number one receivers, and the Jets are looking at Perriman as right now their number one receiver, at least for this year. So he's got a great chance to make a lot of money. If he could play the entire season and be Darnold's number one guy, he's never going to have a better chance this year.
Yeah, that's true. But I think some guys are really wired to be number 2 guys, and I think he might be one of those.
All right. Well, maybe Mims will be the number 1 down the road.
There you go.
Another guy that maybe Ravens fans would have actually preferred. Okay, so Tony, I didn't get a chance to ask you about Russell Street Report. So how long have you been running this Baltimore Raven website?
Well, we used to be called Ravens 24/7, and the Ravens made us change our name because they said we were making money off of their name. But we thought we were just making money because we were good at what we do. But we changed our name to Russell Street Report. And for those that don't know what that even means, Russell Street is the place where the Ravens Stadium, M&T Bank Stadium, resides. So we just decided to call it Russell Street Report. We've been around for 16 years. July will be 17 seasons that we'll be having covered the Ravens, and we cover the Ravens salary cap. We do the X's and O's. We do opinions. We do a message board. So we've got it soup to nuts when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens. So I think anybody out there who's not familiar with Russell Street Report, I think you'll like what you see.
All right. Well, we like what we've heard so far as far as this draft recap, and we get hopefully look. We got the schedules officially come out, of course, in a few hours, but I don't know. I guess the fans, it gives them something to get juiced about, but it's the waiting game of just finding out when it will actually begin. That's very stressful.
It is, and it's so little going on in sports right now that we saw what the NFL draft was like. It was record numbers and viewing audience, even though it was all virtual. And this will be the same tonight when they release the schedule. It's something to look forward to. Hopefully they can play as it's on the dates that they come out with. You know, I've heard some rumors, and I don't know if you have, that they may schedule the first 4 weeks all the non-conference games, so that if in fact those aren't played on time or not played at all, it won't matter in the standings and the rankings for the seedings for the playoffs.
That's still a lot of money that they're giving up.
Yeah, I can't see them having a season without 16 games. Excuse me. They may play into February or March.
Yeah, that might be it. Sure. I think they have already talked about that, haven't they? That's already been a backup plan, and I think that makes much more sense than eliminating games. They'd go that route before eliminating games.
Exactly. When all this happened, and people were like fretting the fact there was nothing to do in March. There was no March Madness. There was no more NBA. There was no spring training, and obviously the NFL was off the grid. But I said, come next March, all those things will collide. It's possible the NFL could still be playing. It's possible that MLB is back in business. NHL, NBA, and March Madness could all come together at one time in March.
Who knows? But I mean, I mean, just thinking about the Masters in November, I think it is.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy to think about, but I mean, does that mean I have to compete with the Masters over the weekend? Yeah, it does with football. It's crazy. I don't know. I'm not. Hey, I can't wait. But I somebody said something about how would the fans go to the games? And when I heard that, I was like, what world do you what country do you live in that you think if they allowed fans to the game that they'd stay away? I mean, seriously. I mean, nobody's staying away if they open the gates and say, come in. That's just not happening. You will find enough fans. If some fans don't want to go, you'll find other fans that'll take their place.
It's going to be really interesting how they unfold that whole, whatever the limitations and restrictions are going to be on that, or if there are going to be any restrictions on going to the game. But if they say only half the people can go, well, which half do they pick, and how do they price their season tickets then if you can only go to half the game? Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how they unfold this whole new world.
I'm glad NASCAR at least is starting next week. I don't care what sport it is, as long as even though there's no fans, I'm glad there is something that is going to start. Just hopefully get the ball rolling. That's all.
Right.
Tony,
go fast, turn left.
Yes. Tony, great job. Thank you very much. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.